Okay, did it? Okay. Good evening, everyone. And those of you out in Zoom land, I hope you can hear me. Tonight's shiur, as always, is Lilu Nishpat Avi Morido Ber Meir Ben Nuven Halevi Imam Rati Baruch Bat Harav Michael. And this week's parsha, of course, the parsha of Yitro. And the first question about the parsha of Yitro, everybody knows, well, what parsha of the Aseret HaDibrot in? We read about Mammon Har Sinai is the parsha of Yitro. So the question is, who is Yitro? Why does he get to have this parsha named after him of all the people? We know that in the Torah, all of Torah, there are only 6 people who have parashot named after them. And it's a very, very strange group of very interesting group of people that have parashot named after them. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, no parashot named after them. Moshe Rabbeinu, no parashot named after him. Aaron, nothing. The people we have are Noach, Sarah, Pinchas, Balak, Korach, and none other than Yitro. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Yitro. When perhaps another year we'll talk about Mammon Har Sinai. We'll talk about Aseret HaDibrot a little bit more. But for tonight, we're going to focus on Yitro, the man, the person, who he is. And we're going to start really with the first Rashi. I mean, the first pasuk says, "Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian Chotei Moshe." So it already, the Torah introduced him not just as Yitro as a name, but he's Kohen Midian. He has a title, and he's Chotei Moshe. He is somebody who is known, related, a relation to somebody who is very familiar to us. He sees a Kol Asher Asal L'Kiyum Moshe Yisrael Amo, everything that Hashem did for Moshe and the Jewish people. Ki Yotzi Hashem et Yisrael Mitzrayim, that Hashem had taken the Jews out of Mitzrayim. So this was what he had heard. Vayishma, he heard. And you'll notice I focused here on the Vayishma, and we're going to see a lot of verbs relating to Yitro. And we're going to see a lot of different ways the Torah is going to refer to him. And Rashi starts us off with the very famous Midrash that Sheva Shemot Nikru Lo. Yitro is known by 7 different names. They are, and he lists them, Reuel, Yeter, Yitro, Chova, Chever, Kani, and Putiel. Those are the 7 names that are listed as belonging to Yitro. We're only going to discuss a few of them tonight. And Rashi now continues. This, by the way, is quoted from Shemot Rabbah by Sifrei. But the first part is also in Shemot Rabbah. Yeter, why is he called Yeter? Al Shem Sheyiter Parsha Achat BaTorah. That he caused one portion to be added to the Torah. That is the portion that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight of V'yata Techazeh, that he gives Moshe a piece of advice, which we're going to see a little bit later. Yitro, why was he called Yitro? Yeter was nothing, it's Yitro. Al Shem Shenitgayer, after he converts to Judaism, Mikiyam HaMitzvot, and he observed the mitzvot as mitzvot. Hosifalo Ot Achad Al Shmo, he gets a letter added to his name. Chovav, he's called Chovav Shechiva Bet Torah. He loved the Torah. And how do I know the Chovav who Yitro? Rashi wants to know, how do I know that Chovav is Yitro? Because we have a verse in Shoftim that says, Mibnei Chovav Chotein Moshe, of the sons of Chovav, who is the Chotein Moshe. Now, last we checked, Moshe only had one wife. Therefore, he could only have one father-in-law. So if it calls Chovav Chotein Moshe, it must be talking about the same gentleman. The Yesh Omrim, however, there was an opinion that says, and up till that's basically this all Sifrei. Yesh Omrim, there are those that say Reuel was not really Yitro. He is Aviv Shal Yitro. He is Yitro's father. Umahu Omer I. Why does it say in the verse which we're going to get to a little bit about Tavono El Reuel Avihem, that the daughters came to Reuel, their father. Shatinokot Kohen Lavi Avi and Abba, because sometimes the children will call their grandfather Abba also. Okay, so Rashi gives us a little bit of insight here that he clearly is somebody who is going to have something written about him in that he's going to give advice. He ultimately, it seems, accepts Judaism and joins the Jewish people, and he loves the Torah. That's what we see from Yitro, from Rashi's opening comment. I want to go through very quickly and briefly through the beginning of this week's parsha story, and then we'll talk about a little bit more in depth. But I wanted to focus on the Yitro and the way he is described. So first it says, Vayishma Yitro. Yitro hears something. Okay? As a result, I repeat the puzzle down here. Then it says, Vayikach Yitro Chotein Moshe. Yitro, and here he's referred to not just as Yitro, but as Yitro Chotein Moshe. Yitro Moshe takes Tzipporah, Moshe's wife. I think we're familiar with a lot of the story points, but he takes Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, and his two sons, and he decides he is going to join the Jewish people. You know, they've been living in Midian, even though we say, wait a minute, how did Tzipporah, why was Tzipporah and the two sons, weren't they with Moshe when he left to go to Egypt back in Shemot before the whole Exodus story? Didn't Moshe take, it specifically says that Moshe takes his wife and his sons, puts them on a donkey, and they're leaving to go to Canaan, and Aaron meets them, and how did they get back to Midian? And somebody's got to fill it in. So the Medrash says, well, what happened is when they met Aaron, Aaron says to him, wait a minute, we got all these people enslaved in Egypt who we were trying to get out. You want to bring more in? Let them go, let them stay here. Or not here, but let them go back, you know, where they're more comfortable. They won't have to go through this whole thing. Was that a good advice or bad advice? We don't know. But the Torah doesn't tell us that happened. It just alludes to that by telling us that Tzipporah and the two sons are with Yitro at this point in time, whenever this is. By the way, Torah doesn't tell us when this happened. All we know that it is after the Jews leave Egypt. Does Yitro, is this portion of Yitro coming to meet the Jews, coming to meet Moshe, is it in chronological order in the Torah, or is it out of chronological order Torah? And of course, the answer is it depends on which parshan you ask. We have machloket among parshanim as to whether this happens before Matan Torah and is written in the correct chronological order in the Torah, or that this whole story of Yitro arriving is not until after Matan Torah. Okay. So again, Yitro, as a result of hearing something, takes action by taking Moshe's family, and if we see in Pasuk Hey, Vayavo Yitro Chotein Moshe, again, he gets this full title of Yitro Chotein Moshe. He comes to the Midbar where Moshe is camped opposite Har Elokim. Now, again, if we understand that the question about, we would think, oh, Moshe's already camped at Har Elokim, so that should give us an idea about when the story happens. The answer is Bnei Yisrael were camped around Har Elokim for over or almost a full year. So it could have been any point during that year. They arrived there, as we see in this week's parsha, they arrived there at the beginning of Sivan, 2448, the year they leave, right after they left Egypt, within 6 weeks of when they left Egypt. They do not leave Har Sinai until almost a year later on the 20th of Iyar. So this story could have happened any point in that time when they're camped around Har Elokim. Gershon, you had a question coming. Oh, the color codes. The blue is just the different ways Yitro, this gentleman is going to be described in the Torah. The yellow is something that happened, that's something that is sensed by Yitro, and the green is something that he does as a result of that. Okay, that's the way I've done this. And I think that's all the colors. We don't have a lot of colors tonight. Sorry. Worked out that way. Okay. Okay, so Moshe, he comes, and now it's interesting because the Torah describes him as coming before he gets there. Vayavo means he came, but here it really means that he sets out on the journey, because Vayomer Moshe, he says to Moshe, I am Yitro, coming to you. So with your wife and sons, by the way. So clearly this Vayomer Moshe is not intended to be a direct that he's speaking to Moshe, unless he already had a cell phone. But I don't think so. I think he sends a messenger ahead to Moshe, probably one of his servants or whatever we want to call his retinue, saying that we're on our way. How do you want to handle this meeting? Because we see clearly that obviously they weren't there yet. No, Moshe goes out to greet his chotain. He doesn't think he goes out to greet his family. Interestingly enough, he goes out to greet his father-in-law. They greet each other. No, notice he is now no longer, obviously, which makes sense from a Torah perspective. He's now, because now we're talking about him in relation to Moshe. He is chotno, as opposed to up until verse 7, up until verse 6, where he sends word to Moshe that he's on the way. the Torah refers to him as Chotein Moshe because he's Moshe's father-in-law. That's what we're talking about. Once we bring Moshe into the picture, he now becomes Chotno. Then, when he gets there, right, Moshe tells him firsthand. Yitro's obviously heard something, as we saw at the beginning of the parsha, but now Moshe fills him in on the details, tells him and gives him a firsthand, first-person, leader perspective of the whole story. So, Vayichad Yitro. Now, Vayichad is a challenging word to understand, but it's clearly not that he does something. It is an emotion that he feels. It is something that he feels. Rashi brings down that he had goosebumps, basically, from hearing the whole story from Moshe firsthand. Al Tova. Oh, by the way, there are other Parshanim who took it the exact opposite way. He's got goosebumps because he heard that his allies, the Egyptians, all got wiped out. So he wasn't so happy. But in either way, he has some emotion, and that's why it's yellow as opposed to green. And then he says, interestingly enough, Baruch Hashem Asher Itzil Etchem Miyad Mitzrayim Miyad Paro. I blessed be Hashem who saved you from the hand of the Egyptians, the hands of Paro. Now I know Ki Gadol Hashem Mikol HaElokim. God is greater than all of the powers in the world. Because basically they were repaid measure for measure, exactly what they tried to do. The Jews, they got thrown back at them. They tried to drown all the Jews, they all got drowned. And then it says, Vayikach Yitro Chotein Moshe Olos V'achim L'Elokim. He brings offerings to God, and Aaron and all the elders come to eat. And now again, he's back to being Chotein Moshe, because Moshe sort of has faded out of the picture because Yitro is now the focal point. So it's now back to Chotein Moshe. The next, and that, by the way, that's the end of the first Aliyah. There is no new chapter, no new parsha in the Torah. It's the same parsha. It says Vayibi Macharat, the next day. Literally, Macharat means the next day. Now we have again Parshanim trying to understand next day after what? The day after he arrived. I mean, the pshat seems to be the day after he arrives is when the next phase of this story occurs. Rashi is forced because of a variety of things to say that this Macharat means the day after Moshe came down from Har Sinai the third time with the second Luchot. Okay, after he comes down with the second Luchot, that's when this story resumes. Even though the up through verse Yud Bet happens before, sometime during the first week of Sivan, when the Jews get there before the revelation, this story doesn't happen until afterwards. And again, if we look at what happens, it seems clearly this story, at least this part of the story, seems to have to be after that from a variety of perspectives. Anyway, the next day after something, Moshe is sitting and judging the people. All right. The line outside Moshe's office, you thought you had to wait long to get your corona shots, right? Or your corona test. Well, the line outside Moshe's was all day. It was the whole day. You had to stand online the whole day to get a chance to see Moshe. But Yar, Chotein Moshe, again, now he's lost his name Yitro. In this chapter of the rest of this chapter, we're not going to see Yitro as Yitro, be called Yitro again, or Yetro, or any of those other names. From here on, he's going to be Chotein Moshe. Vayar Chotein Moshe, Moshe's father-in-law, sees all that Moshe is doing. Vayomer, he doesn't just sit and watch; he speaks up. Okay, that's the focus. I said we're going to get to the story a little bit more later, but okay. Moshe answers him. He answers Moshe. He says, "Not a good idea. We got to do something about it." And he gives him this whole piece of advice. And then it says, "No, Moshe listens to this advice," which I said we're going to get into a little bit more, and does everything that Yitro advised. He does what he does, and then, interestingly enough, very nicely, like a little package in a bow, the Torah then wraps it up in verse 27. He sends him on his way to go home. Again, time frames are missing in this parsha. The only time frame we have is one word, mimacharat, the next day. So the whole time frame is how long did Yitro stay? When did he get there? When did he leave? Great questions. What else?
Kind of like he sends him off. Did Yitro want to go?
Thank you. Perfect lead into my next keta. That's exactly it. Gershon's question was, it says, Vaishalach Moshe, no, he sent him. Was this Moshe's initiative? Was it Yitro's initiative? Was it a mutual agreement? What originated him leaving? So the answer to that question maybe only appear in the following keta in Sefer Bamidbar. This is chapter Yud in Bamidbar. Now remember, I just told you that Bnei Yisrael arrive at Har Sinai, Sivan, 2448. They leave ER 2449. So they're there for almost a year. Bamidbar Perek Yud is ER 2449. Okay, we're about to leave Har Sinai. Hashem has told Moshe, tell the Jews it's time to leave Har Sinai to go to Eretz Yisrael. That's what we're here for. We're here to inherit Yisrael, not here to inherit Har Sinai. Yes, we stopped off. We got the Torah. Now it's time to move on. So in Perek Yud, in Bamidbar, we have the following exchange, interesting event. Vayomer Moshe lechovav ben Reuel hamidjani chotein Moshe. Okay, so firstly, we got a problem here. First, we have a chotein Moshe. So the question here, firstly, is he says to Chovav, the son of Reuel, who is the Midianite, who happens to be the chotein Moshe. Is chotein Moshe Reuel? Is it Chovav? Who is who? Okay, again, it's a dangling chotein Moshe. And we just had Rashi quoting the Midrash that Chovav and Reuel are just two different names of Yitro, although he did bring down the alternate opinion that Reuel was Yitro's father. And that alternate opinion is based on exactly on this pasuk, because it said Lechovav ben Reuel. So clearly Reuel and Chovav, at least according to this pasuk, don't appear to be the same person. They appear to be two separate people. And that's why Rashi brings the alternate opinion that Reuel is really Chovav's father or Yitro's father. But that again, the chotein Moshe here it's Chovav, parentheses, ben Reuel Hamidjani, or ben Reuel, parentheses, Hamidjani, chotein Moshe. That Chovav is the one who's the chotein Moshe. And this, by the way, is the source for Chovav, that other name of Yitro. But no Yitro here. He's definitely not Yeter. He's not Yitro. He's Chovav, or maybe Reuel. We're not sure. Okay, but Moshe tells whoever this is, he tells, and we are leaving Har Sinai to go to Eretz Yisrael. Come with us. And you will help us out. Because Hashem is ready to fulfill his promise to give us Eretz Yisrael. Vayomer Elav, he said, no, lo elech. Sorry, not going with you. I'm going home, going back home. By the way, interestingly enough, he says El Artzi Ve'el Moladati. Interestingly enough, there's a midrash, by the way, back in the beginning, way in the beginning of Shemot, long before parshat Yitro, that tells us that when Paro has this Jewish problem he wants to deal with, one of his three top advisors is none other than our very same Yitro. Okay, by the way, the other two were Bilam and Eov, but that's a whole different midrash. But the fact is, here it appears that he's going somewhere other than Eretz Yisrael, whatever that is he's going. I mean, he's referred to as Hamidjani, so we would assume that he was going back to Midjan. Okay, Gershon.
Is there some sort of parody going on here with the language?
Again, the question of Eretz and Moledet, Artzi and Moladity. Okay, Gershon's question is the Artzi and Moladity referencing back to Lech Lecha of Avraham Avinu, where Avraham was told, Lech me Artz me Moladitecha. Again, I don't think that it's intentionally here that it put in in this way. But the Midrash wants to, and Rashi quotes a Midrash that says, well, why did he want to go home? That because he wanted to try to teach everybody at home about Judaism. That's about God, not necessarily Judaism, but about God, okay? About the God of the Jews, the God, the creator. That's one opinion. There's a very different opinion brought down that the reason he wanted to leave was because he didn't want people to say that the only reason he had come was because he was going to get the piece of land in Eretz Yisrael. So he didn't want people to think that he had an altruistic reason for giving Moshe his daughter, for joining the Jewish people, that there was something in it for him. And therefore he said, no, I'm going to go home where and go back to where I'm, not people won't even think I'm doing something to take advantage of our relationship. That's the other opinion. Okay. Anyway, so Moshe says, "Oh, don't leave. We want you to come." And by the way, the Torah doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't say he left. Doesn't say he didn't leave as a result of this exchange, which makes the parshanim say, that's because it didn't have to, because it already told us back in Shemot, Vayilech lo al artzo, he went home. Okay, why did Moshe send him away? If we understand these two stories, if they dovetail, clearly Moshe sends him away because he asked to go home. Okay, even though Moshe tried to get him to stay, he didn't want to stay, so Moshe sends him home. He doesn't keep him, he doesn't hold him hostage, basically. Okay, so as I say, one way of looking at the story. We go back now let's go to the next layer. Let's go back to here now. One of the things that I wanted to focus on, by the fact that, again, the colors, that's always tries to make this focus, is the fact that Yitro, it begins with Yitro heard. Rashi again asks, quotes the Medrash, what did he hear? And it says he heard about Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchemet Amalek. Because again, the last thing we read about last week was the war against Amalek. So what did Yitro hear about? He heard about these two events, the splitting of the sea and the war against Amalek. And the commentaries tell us, why is this parsha, specifically those who say that it's out of chronological order. If something in the Torah is out of chronological order, we always have to have a reason why. And the reason the parshanim who say that this is out of order say it's out of order is because the Torah wants to juxtapose Yitro to Amalek. We have two different groups of people. One is an individual, perhaps maybe with a family group. The other is a nation that witness or hear about or learn about that Hashem has taken the Jews out of Egypt. And we have two entirely different responses. So the Torah wants to juxtapose Yitro's response to the Jews leaving Egypt of saying, wow, blessed be Hashem, with Amalek's response, no, we got to fight the Jews before God gives them the Torah and keep this Torah from getting to the Jews, because then they're going to be unstoppable. Okay, so that's one reason, at least according to those that say this is out of chronological order. Once they say it's in chronological order, don't have to have the same rationale. Why is it here? Because this is where it belongs. It's in chronological order. They just have to explain why is the parsha here in the first place. Gershon, you had a comment. Go ahead. Oh, okay. So the question is, why this whole buildup? And as I said, I think we've already gotten some hints about it by the fact that the Torah is teaching us here the whole fact that Tzipporah and Moshe's children did not experience, or at least apparently did not experience firsthand the Exodus. They are the only Jews at the time who don't experience the Exodus firsthand. And interestingly enough, if we go back to the parsha when the Jews are leaving Egypt, of the parsha Tefillin, V'gadatah levincha bayom hahu lemor. You, maybe Hashem is talking to Moshe, you're going to be the one who's going to be the role model for how to tell the story to somebody who didn't personally witness it. Because you're the only one now in this generation who didn't personally witness this. Until more kids come along, you're going to have to teach it to your children, and let's see how good a job you can do. So Moshe is the role model, if you will, for teaching your children about the Exodus. Okay, that's side point. The other thing, as I said, that Yitro reacts. He doesn't just hear something and say, okay, nice news, okay, file it off in my news file and I'll get back to life. He immediately says, something has to be done about this. I've got to do something about it. And we're going to see that same exact characteristic later on when he sits and he's watching Moshe. By Yarchotein Moshe, he sees that Moshe is sitting in front of all the people and they're all standing on line, standing around waiting. Vayom, he says, this is not a good idea. He doesn't sit back and say, okay, why am I? I'm an outsider. Why should I get involved? Moshe, that's the way Moshe wants to run the shop. Let him run the shop that way. Maybe that's what Hashem told him. I don't know. But he doesn't. He says, I see something here that perhaps can be fixed or changed perhaps for the better. But should I get involved? And the answer is yeah. Yitro says, I got to get involved. I'm sorry, typical. Just like, yeah, it's not the way we do it in the old country. What are you doing here, man? We got to get it fixed. Okay. So anyway, again, and you'll notice he doesn't. And first, and he says, Moshe, what are you doing? And Moshe gives him an explanation, and then he doesn't stop. He says, it's not a good idea. He says, it's interesting. He says, Lo tova davar sh'ata. Not good. I think I got a better idea. Okay. Now, if we were to study this story, and let me just briefly, for those who are following on, who maybe haven't heard the story, maybe don't remember it from last year. Basically, Moshe at the end is sitting, and there's a long line of people waiting. Yitro says, it would be better if we had a system of intermediate steps here. Instead of everybody who has a question, a problem, anything has to come to you. If you would have, a council a group of people who are leaders over 1,000, group of people who are leaders over 100, leaders over 10. This way, there's a hierarchy, so people who have, quote, easier questions or less pressing questions or less nationally important questions can go to a local leader and get an answer rather than having to come to you all the time and waiting. And this way, you won't be bogged down and they won't be bogged down. And Moshe says, okay, sounds like an idea, we'll do it. And that's exactly what happens. And the question we have to ask, only because the Torah almost points us in the direction of this question, is, was it a good idea? Was it something that should have been implemented? And if it was something that should have been implemented, why didn't Moshe think of it himself? Why did he need somebody outside to suggest it and for it to be implemented? So the sum of the questions that are raised by the Parshanim on this whole episode. Yes, Gershon.
For him to delegate it, he needs to educate people, which means he has to set up a yeshiva to teach a whole cadre of people below him what the rules are and how to behave, if only he knew.
But Gershon's point is he'd have to set up yeshiva to teach leadership skills or delegate, but he has to learn delegating skills in order to do that. But the fact is, Moshe's going to be teaching some group of people, whether it's individuals or the whole collective Am Yisrael, he's going to have to teach them anyway, all of the laws. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of Moshe goes up to Shemayim. What is he doing for 40 days? He's learning the whole Torah. He's not just taking a scroll and saying, oh, here it is, Hashem. That's not it. It's, what does all this mean? Because anybody can, hand you a book and say, here, read it and understand it. But you read it, you'll have your understanding. And clearly, anytime you read something, there are going to be questions that arise for the author. What did you mean by this word? When you said X, or you said this, what did that mean? What's the intent? What are you trying to get at? So clearly Moshe has a lot he's got to share with everybody, but he can't necessarily do it with everybody at the same time. I mean, we have a very famous midrash that describes Moshe's course of education, that he would first educate, he would first sit and review this section with only Aaron. Then, Aaron would sit next to him, and then Aaron's sons would walk in, and they'd be the next students for the next round. And Moshe would teach it, and then Aaron would teach it, so they'd have it reviewed already. And then the elders would all come in, and Moshe would teach it to the elders. Then Aaron would teach it to the elders. Then Aaron's sons would teach it to the elders, and then the whole congregation would come in. Moshe would teach the whole congregation. I got it out of order slightly, but because Moshe would teach it 4 times to everybody, then Aaron would teach it to the next group. Everybody, it was all. But the point was, everybody had to learn, how to teach it. It wasn't just Moshe sat in the yeshiva and there was this 600,000 seat yeshiva going on 24/7. That wasn't the way it worked. Moshe would give the rules, and then there was a hierarchy. Now, was that in place before this? Was that after this? We don't know. But we do know that in Parshat Dvarim, when Moshe, 40 years later, begins his farewell address, which takes 5 weeks to deliver, one of the things that he does is he reviews this whole story. He doesn't mention Yitro. He just says, I chose leaders. And it's part and parcel of this section where Moshe is telling him all the things that went wrong during the 40 years, not the things that went right during the 40 years. He's telling him all the things that went wrong that we got to learn from and not repeat these mistakes. So the question is, what was the mistake? Rashi there in Dvarim says, the mistake was that when Moshe suggested this to the people should have said, no, Moshe, we don't want an intermediary and we'll never have interaction with you. We want to interact with you all the time. That's what they should have answered, but they didn't. At least that's Rashi bringing that from the Midrash's opinion, that this was part of Moshe's, perhaps had the people had more direct contact with Moshe, they would have been, their faith, their belief would have been stronger. And maybe when the Moradnim would have come back, maybe they would have felt differently if they'd have spent the last year every day, in Moshe's presence. We don't know. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The problem we just didn't have the couldn't do both because there was so quarrels that.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I think what Dave, I think what your part.
They didn't want to learn from Moshe. They all the quarrels.
I think it's helpful. I think what Moshe perhaps is alluding to there in Dvarim is the fact that maybe we should have split this into two in terms of the delegation. And when it came to the teaching, maybe we should have had Moshe directly teaching us. But when it came to the litigation, okay, there you want to not be. But it doesn't seem that that's what happened. It seems that this becomes the norm, the normal role of delegation, not just of judicial authority, but also of educational authority, also seems to get distributed rather than all four. Now, perhaps, again, maybe it was good that it didn't fall on Moshe's shoulders because this way he was able to survive for 40 years as the leader. Maybe, although even at the end of the 120 years, it says, he hadn't in any way physically become weakened because he was 120 years old. Having said that, just the fact that it appears in Devarim seems that perhaps it wasn't all as nice and smooth as it seems from parshat Yitro. That's all I'm suggesting. Okay. So I wanted to go do one quick flashback, and we're going to get back a little bit more into this story here. The first time we meet Yitro, okay, and I wanted to, again, we were already going to see, I think, these characteristics I just talked about, his ability to look at, perceive, hear, see things, and try to learn and grow from them and help others learn and grow from them. Okay, so we're going to go back to the first time we encountered Yitro, way back, before, not only before the Exodus, but before even the burning bush. It says that we know that Moshe killed an Egyptian. Ultimately, Paro finds out. Paro finds out that he's killed this Egyptian. Moshe wants to kill Moshe. Moshe runs away. He lands in the land of Midian, and he decides to hang out near a well. Nice place to hang out. Okay. And here's how he's introduced again. Midian. This person who's called the Kohen Midian. Now, again, Kohen means some type of religious officiant, generally. So this Midianite religious leader, priest, as we would say in English, Sheva Banot had 7 daughters. We know the whole story. They filled up all the waters. The shepherds threw them away before they had the chance to bring the sheep over to the water. And Moshe goes and says to the shepherds, how can you, what kind of chutzpah, they just threw all this water. Who gives you the right to throw them away? Their sheep are going to go first. This is their water. They drew the water. Their sheep get to drink it. You guys had to wait your turn. And as a result, Vatavono el Ruel Avihet. Now notice again, he's not called Yitro here, they called Ruel. And he immediately perceives that there's something different today. What happened? How'd you guys get home so fast? Normally I send you to the well. It takes you 16 hours, whatever many hours to water all the sheep. How'd you get home so fast today? So it's not that he just realizes that they came back faster. He wants to know what happened. What happened? Your kid came home early from school one day. What would you say? All right, they got home early. Teacher must have been sick. Substitute didn't show up. Okay, whatever. But he wants to know what's going on. They tell him that about this Egyptian guy who saved them. And And he doesn't stop there. Okay, this is what happened. Okay, go up to your room and do your homework or whatever. No, that's not what happened. He says, wait a minute. Some guy helped you out? And where is he? Who is he? What happened to him? He sees that this guy is somebody who helped his daughters. He wants to reciprocate lefachot, it seems. He wants to do sakir and lovi ochalach. I'm going to at least invite him in for a meal. I don't know where he is, whether he's just passing through, whether he's lost, whether he's homeless. We don't know anything about him. And you guys just had the audacity. He helped you out and you didn't even say anything to him? What's going on here? Okay. No, but the point is he is, so I'm saying we see this already, that he's got this, he doesn't want to just let things be and glean information and do nothing about it. He asks pointed question. He wants to know what's going on, and he wants to use that information, possibly to help others, but also to help himself if necessary, to help himself grow and learn. He sees this guy and he sees, why did he help? Why would a perfect stranger go out of his way to incur the wrath of all the shepherds just for the sake of some strange shepherdesses that he didn't know? So he wants to get a little more insight into who this guy is. Okay, and then ultimately, Moshe. Now, interestingly enough, in Chaf Aleph, he's not Kohen Mijan, he's not real Ha'ish, he's just called the man. Now, if you remember correctly, we had this very same terminology used when at another well story with Eliezer is referred to there as Ha'ish, when Betuel and Lavan and the whole story with Eliezer is also referred to Ish. Very interesting. But here it's not Moshe who's referred to as Ha'ish, it's the host who's referred to as Ha'ish. So it's a different, but I think it's almost there to point us back to the fact that there's going to be an outcome of this well story, and it is immediately by Tain. And Tzipor told Moshe again. Yitro acts and he says, I want to keep this guy close here. I think he's an industrious guy. He's a guy who cares about justice and miscarriage of justice. He's a guy I want part of my family, and that's exactly what he does. He gives him his daughter. So we see already Yitro is not just your everyday, sideline stander. He's somebody who wants to be in the game, not somebody who's sitting back and watching. And I think we see that clearly in this advice that he gives to Moshe. It's, he doesn't just say, Moshe, you got it all screwed up, and now go, you figure out the problem. He comes and offers him a suggestion. Not like many people who, when they see a problem, are very quick to point out the problem, very quick to complain, but don't have a solution. Yitro has a potential solution. So I think that is the Torah in a few short sentences that we have about Yitro throughout the whole Torah. We get a very interesting perspective, because as I said, this is basically it. There are only two other sukkim where Yitro appears, and they are immediately before the burning bush he's mentioned, immediately after the burning bush. But again, the one before the burning bush he's mentioned as in passing, just as Moshe Yaroet Son Yitro no Kohen Mijan. Again, we get the whole title. He's Yitro. He's his father-in-law. He's the Kohen Mijan, and he had a lot of sheep. And Moshe is now the shepherd, not the girls anymore. The girls have now retired from being shepherdesses, and he has now got the job. And then, of course, the burning bush story intervenes, and immediately after the burning bush, it says Vayelech Moshe. Moshe leaves the burning bush. Now notice he doesn't come back to Yitro. No, he doesn't come back to Ruel. No, he doesn't come back to Chovav. He comes back to Yeter. No, by the way, this is the only place in all of Tanakh where he's called Yeter. Okay, this is where the Yeter comes from. And he says, God's just appeared to me. I'm going back to Egypt. By Yomer Yitro, in the same exact verse, Yitro answers him, Lech l'shalom, go in peace. So we see already that couple of different names. He has different things. As I said, here he's Yitro or Yeter. Up the story above, he was Reuel. And then in the story in Bamidbar, he's either Chovav or Reuel. We're not really sure which, but we see at least that he has all these different names and different things associated with them. We also see, as I said, that he is not somebody who sits back and waits for things to happen. He is listening, he is looking, he is watching. So the question is, why is this whole story in the Torah, and even more so, why is it the immediate parsha before the giving of the Torah? As I said, according to those that say it's a chronological order, okay, the reason it's here is because this is when the beginning of the story happens. Yitro arrives before Matan Torah, and that's why the story has to be here. The reason the half that appears after Matan Torah, Vayhimi Macharat, is written there is because the Torah wanted to finish the whole story, and that's even why it describes him going home, even though he's not going to leave for another 10 months. It describes him already as going home in this story because it wants to just wrap it up, just like we do with Terach and we do with Esav. We've talked about it, let's wrap it up so we can move on to the next topic, and we won't have to digress later on to mention this whole story again, which is very frequent in Torah, in the way the Torah is written. The other point, again, that Yitro, I think, is here because when we go through Matan Torah, we're going to see lots of interesting things, emotions happening. We're going to have V'cholam ro'im et hakolam, which is a very strange. I don't know how you see sounds. Okay, it's the only place where we are described as seeing sounds. Ro'im et hakolam. And the whole Sinai experience, which we read about immediately after this story of Yitro, is an emotional, it's an intense sensory perception story. And the Torah wants to juxtapose Yitro, I think, to this whole story, to tell us that it's not enough to just hear and see and feel. We have to use those senses to learn, to grow, and to think about what is God trying to tell us and what does God want us to do in response. So, as I said, Yitro, go back to the first story with the daughters. The daughters come home and say, this guy saved us. He says, okay, very nice. Let's move on to tomorrow. But he doesn't, because he wants to. He says, wait a minute. If he did something for us, first and foremost, we owe him something. I like to repay what I owe him before even if I don't owe him in a court sense, he's not taking me to court, but I owe him a debt of gratitude, and I want to repay that to the best that I can. Certainly, when he finds out that he's, a nomad, he's running away, he's a fugitive from justice, he would want to welcome him, or whether he finds out he's a fugitive from justice or he's just a fugitive or a nomad, he'd want to welcome him in and give him a place to stay, and that's what he does. So Yitro clearly is telling us that there's a lot more to just life than just hearing, seeing, watching. It's understanding, internalizing, and acting on that. Yes, Gersh, you had a comment. Okay. Dave.
He doesn't just say, that's invited in. The language suggests he uses
Yeah, that's clearly he doesn't go out and invite him, and he says, Kieran Lo, you guys go call him. Yes, absolutely.
It's right in there. He's involved in education, he's involved in trying to bring up the mentorship.
Yeah. Oh, clearly. I mean, if we go into the Midrashim, there's a Midrash on the verse where it says, where he blesses God. He says, "Atoyadati gadol Hashem mikol Elohim." That God is greater than all the other powers. Now, Elohim, of course, translated God. Hashem is greater than all of them. Rashi brings down midrashically that he could actually say that because he was the first, professor or of comparative religion. He knew them all. He had practiced them all. He had been through them all, and he knew that they were all, for what they were worth. Which is a nice midrash. It says, but I think, David, that's a great point that when we first are introduced to him with the story with his daughters and the shepherdesses, he uses it to instill within the daughters this importance of, firstly, of hakarat hatov, hachnasat orachim. Clearly, menschlichkeit. He uses it, as you say, as a teachable moment. He says, Kieran Lo. He says to them, call him in. He doesn't send a servant out to call him in. He says to the girls, go call him in. Not that a servant would have worked, because who knows if they would have known who he was. Although I guess I would assume he stood out because they clearly call him an Ish Mitzri, as he's an Egyptian, where everybody else around the world was not Egyptian. At least that's the presumption you get. Because had he been one of many, they would have had to give a more definitive description of him. In other words, their description is Ish Mitzri Tilanim Yad Roim, this Egyptian guy. So he clearly was recognizable as an Egyptian, and they didn't ask him for any other identification. So he is telling them, hey, wait, when somebody does you a favor, try to find out who it is. Don't just, let it go. And more often, you meet somebody in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't say that, he was driving by in his Rolls Royce or his camels or whatever. He just happened to be there. So there's nowhere we don't get a sense that, they said, he was, he's probably long gone by now. They don't say that. They do call him. And so presumably they had some sense that he was not leaving immediately. Because otherwise they would have said, forget it, he's gone by now. I mean, if you think about it, we don't know how far they live from the well, but if you were a normal traveler traveling from oasis to oasis or from village to village, you wouldn't be hanging around. Once you got there, got your water filled, your bought whatever food you wanted, you'd be moving on, because people didn't travel at night back then, and you knew it. If the day was going on, you had to get on the road before it got to be too late. So the fact that they don't say, forget it, he's gone, maybe means they realized that he hadn't yet decided to leave town, but he was still hanging around. But again, we don't know any of this because the Torah doesn't, because it's not that necessary. But I think that David, your point is a good one, that clearly the need to educate them, because they left them there, they didn't say anything to them, they didn't have any further information about him, that leads Yitro to believe, wait a minute, we gotta shore up their knowledge of the world here. Maybe they just had no information. All they did was they took the sheep to the well, and they came home every day, so they had no social interaction. They didn't know how to deal socially, is a possibility. Okay. So again, I think that I don't know what loose ends I still haven't tied up, because I've long since forgotten them already. But the point I wanted to make in discussing Yitro is clearly this importance of understanding what's happening around us, understanding the impact on us of different news we hear, different things we hear, and clearly our relationship with Hashem is very much dependent on using our senses to glean information that will help us make the right decisions. Whether it's giving other people advice that will help them along, whether it's helping out those who have helped us out or our family out. And there are a number of different lessons that we see. And again, as I said, the juxtaposition of Yitro's story to Amalek, that we can see lots of different things going on, and we can derive many different lessons from them. And our job is to try to understand what is it that Hashem is trying to tell us in everything that happens, whether it's in the world or whether it's to us personally or to our families. Hashem is trying to direct us in our lives. I mean, there's all too many stories about people who, were lost or at a crossroads in life and heard something happened and realized that it wasn't necessarily a coincidence that happened to them at that time. Because in this world, there are no coincidences. When Hashem calls us, we might not hear it because we think it's a coincidence, but it's really Hashem reminding us that we have a mission to do individually, collectively as the Jewish people, and we hope and pray that we will hear those lessons and hear those words and learn from them, so that we can strengthen our awareness of Hashem and strengthen the whole world's awareness of Hashem. Questions, comments, feedback? Okay. Anybody out there? Is anybody still on the call? I can't touch. One of the problems with the
still here, Aaron.
One of the problems with screen share is you never know who's on the Zoom call once you let them in. Anyway, have a good evening to all out there in Zoom land. And we hope to see you again, B'ezras Hashem, next week. Unless you have comments or feedback out there. Anybody?
Nope,
Okay.
nope, everything good.
All right. Laila Tov all.
Okay.
Thank you. Laila Tov.
Laila
You well.
Tov. Close.